Good evening. I'd like to welcome everybody to the September 6th meeting of the Milford Planning and Zoning Board. If we would please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence. Thank you. Meg, if you would call the roll.
Ms. Austin.
Present.
Mr. Castagnoli.
Here.
Mr. Hirsch.
Here.
Mr. Cater.
Present.
Mr. Collegian.
Present.
Mr. Moore.
Present.
Mr. Quish.
I'm here.
Sorry, I usually wait to the end. Mr. Sadi.
To the right of the chair, I'm here.
Mr. Zaharides.
Present.
Thank you.
Our first order of business is new business vote by November 10th, 2022, 4 Oxford Road, Zone LI petition of David Marisol for a site plan review to construct 14 live-work units on map 102, block 702, parcels 4D1, 3, 5, 7, and 8, of which Oxford Condos LLC is the owner. The applicant has the floor.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. For the record, my name is Kevin Crusade, and my office is at 3 Lafayette Street here in Milford. Can you hear it? Too loud? Too loud? Oh, better? Okay. My office is at Kevin Crusade, and my office is at 3 Lafayette Street here in Milford. I'm here with the applicant and the engineer. You probably remember that this was, you granted a special exception application for this use several months ago. Might even be a little bit longer than that for these live-work units. And since then, the applicant has worked with the project team, Inland Wetlands, the city engineer's office, to come up with acceptable site plans. Mr. Solkis's administrative summary states that the application is substantially compliant with the zoning regulations, and then also points out that there are a couple of conditions of approval that the city engineer would like to see. One of them is a revised drainage report, and not to get too far into detail on that, but that centers around a pre-existing detention pond from when this development was first constructed, and the vegetation that's growing in it and whether that detention pond still functions as originally intended. And the second part of that, which is related, is Inland Wetlands would like to see to ensure that the drain pipe is still a viable drain pipe, and they want a video camera to be sent down that to confirm that it's not cracked and still working. The applicant agrees to both of those conditions of approval. And we're here tonight really to answer any of your questions, since you've already approved the use previously. So subject to that, we're here to answer your questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the board? Mr. Sadi.
Thank you, Attorney Crusade. And at least on the vote, I can see from the minutes I was not present. I was just wondering, you're proposing 4D1, 3, 5, 7, and 8. What happens to 2, 4, and 6?
Right now, those are being left as is, I believe. Is that correct? Yeah, those are going to be left as is. They're going to stay the traditional commercial use that they are.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? David, if you would give us an overview, please.
The applicant is proposing to convert and expand 10 office condominium units into live workspaces. The Planning and Zoning Board has previously approved the special exception on December 7th, 2021 to allow the use, and now the applicant is before the board for the site plan. In each unit, 20% is designated as a work area and is separated from the living area by a wood slat screen wall. The existing on-site storm drainage basin is shown as mature vegetation. The city engineer has requested the applicant to provide the city with an updated storm water drainage report. A video camera inspection of the drainage line is also required to confirm its functionality and is requested by both the city engineer and the inland wetland officer. The board should condition its approval on submission of a stormwater report to the satisfaction of the city engineer and the satisfactory video inspection of the existing stormwater line. The application appears to be substantially compliant with the zoning regulations and with the terms and conditions of the special exception granted December 7th, 2021.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the board? If not, I'd hear a motion.
I move to approve with the following conditions the petition of David Marisol for the site plan review to construct 14 live-work units at MAP 102, Block 702, parcels 4D-1, 4D-3, 4D-5, 4D-7, and 40-8, of which Oxford Condos LLC is the owner. The following conditions are what I am recommending in my motion. The applicant will provide updated stormwater, drainage, and drainage system information to the satisfaction of the city engineer. More specifically, submission of a stormwater report and a satisfactory video inspection of the existing stormwater line.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Mr. Cater, thank you. Motion and a second. Is there discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Meg, if you would call the roll.
Ms. Austin?
With the motion.
Mr. Cassignoli?
Yes.
Mr. Hirsch?
With the motion.
Mr. Cater?
With the motion.
Mr. Collegian?
With the motion.
Mr. Moore?
With the motion.
Mr. Sadi?
With the motion,
Mr. Zaharidis?
With the motion.
And Chairman Quish.
I'm also with the motion. Good luck. The next order of business is a public hearing closed by September 6th, 2022, vote by November 9th, 2022. Proposed regulation change 22-4, petition of Kevin Crusading Esquire for a change to Article 7, Section 7111, 7112, and 7113 to change site plan review procedures. Applicant has the floor.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair. Just very quickly, we got an email late this afternoon that's been distributed to the board by a citizen who is against the proposal. It's in front of you, just for the record.
I'm sorry, I can't understand you. Could you, there's something wrong with the PA system or something. I can't hear you.
There was a submission this afternoon by email by a citizen who is not in favor of the proposal, Donna Dutko. I just wanted to point that out to be part of the record.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Dave, is that the letter from Donna Dutko?
That's correct.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, again, my name is Kevin Crusading. This is a personal application of mine. My home address is 11 Bonsaline Street in Milford. I'm not representing any clients, parties, or interested persons with respect to this application. This application has come about as a result of preparing and working with land use applications here in Milford and other communities for a number of years. I had been thinking over time, because I spend a lot of my time with land use applications here and in other communities, ways to make things more efficient or run more smoothly. I was looking at this from an organizational perspective, essentially what the organization could do to change. It's not directed in a specific individual. I just want to make that part of it clear, and I did reply to Mr. Sulkas's administrative summary. But essentially, just to give you a little bit of background, and I don't want to bore you with this too much, I'm not sure if anybody on the board now was here when they did the Kimball report. Maybe Mr. Quish might have been. It was 2008, 2009. It was a study, along with another study, that the city had commissioned to look into improving efficiencies in the city of Milford. And at that time, the Milford Building Department and the Planning and Zoning Department had significant delays. And there was a lot of different recommendations that came out of that. I gave you, as part of this application, it's filed with a link to the agenda, all of the different recommendations and studies that came out of that. There was the Kimball Report, and then there was the Kimball Report Implementation Team, which was using the acronym CRIT. It was comprised of people, I think, appointed by Mayor Riccitelli at the time. So they suggested a lot of things, and one of them was to have an overseer, oversight of the two departments. It was Building Department and Land Use, and then they folded in the wetlands into that as well when they implemented it. And the creation of that was the Department of Permitting and Land Use. Prior to that, there was no Department of Permitting and Land Use. It was City Planner, Building Department. And then they hired a Director of Permitting and Land Use. The original one was Jocelyn Mathiasen. She was here for a few years. And then eventually she left, and Joe Griffith, who is here tonight, took her spot. So originally when Joe Griffith came into, Jocelyn Mathiasen had a lot of difficulty. This is my personal view of what happened back then, implementing some of these things with some of the department heads that were in place at the time. Joe Griffith came on, I don't know what year Joe got here, I apologize, Joe, but with Joe's strong building background based on him being an architect, the issues with the building department or the delay issues, I should say, were remedied relatively quickly, relatively speaking, quickly, because Joe was very familiar with the building code and could understand what was an appropriate time frame to review plans, building plans, construction plans, and what wasn't. So that was very effective as far as the building department goes. And then the individual who was head of the building department, the chief building inspector, I think retired and moved on to a different job or to full retirement, I'm not sure. And then with respect to the planning and zoning department, there were some steps taken, some of them based on the Kimball Report and CRIT, I guess, recommendations with how the site plans and the planning and zoning applications are handled. And toward that end, Joe had implemented some internal department policies, that written report from the reviewing officer, which in Milford right now is the city planner, within a certain number of days. And this goes back several years. And that went on for a while, and there was some progress made so that you weren't submitting plans several different times and having different responses about, the plans are submitted once, you get 5 comments, the plans are revised to address those 5 comments, you submit them again, and then there's other comments based on other things. So that kind of limited that. And then I think respectfully to Joe and the staff and the departments here, I know this is many years pre-COVID, so it's not necessarily COVID related, but I think that the bureaucratic, just the regulatory process in general wears you down. And I think that probably in the past couple of years, with COVID added onto it, in addition to a tremendous amount of, I'm not really sure how many applications compared to past years. I don't know whether staff is overworked or not. I can guess one way or the other whether they have too much to do and they're overwhelmed or it's understaffed. But I think that it's kind of crept back up to where the planning and zoning review process has been delayed. I'd like to talk organizationally speaking tonight. I don't want to get into specific examples of how long things, take. But in looking at this and struggling with it, representing clients who, time is money to a lot of these clients. Some clients come in, they submit the application, Mr. Sulkus makes his review comments, and you don't hear from the client for 2 or 3 months, either because something's changed, or they have to find funding, or their design professionals are busy. But a lot of the clients, would complain to me, why does this review process take so long, and, what's taking so long, and why do we need to do this? So, in thinking about it, I then started looking at the Connecticut General Statutes again. I went back and looked at the Kimball report and the CRIT implementation team. And one of the critical aspects of it is Connecticut General Statute 8-7D, which has a timeline for submission for review. 65 days on a site plan application from the time the application's filed until you're supposed to have a decision on it. Otherwise, the application's automatically approved, as long as it's just a site plan and it doesn't have a special permit or some other aspect attached to it. So I researched some case law. I provided all the cases. I know that, although there's several lawyers on the board, I'm not sure that anyone wants to really read those cases, but those cases are presented to you I've highlighted some aspects of them. Those cases are presented to you to show the importance that the courts have recognized with 8-7D and the timeline that goes along with these site plan applications. So the way Milford's regulations are set up right now, the application is not considered filed until Mr. Sulkus or the city planner or the reviewer, whoever's holding that position, certifies it as complete. And whether it's intentional or unintentional, the applied effect of that is that the city is not complying with 8-7D because the statute does not start ticking until the application is filed. So that's one critical thing that I think the board may really want to consider and talk about. And the proposal is to not exclude the city planner position from doing the review process. The proposal is to add the DPLU also as somebody who can determine who is going to do the plan review. So, for example, going back to the Kimball report, when the department organization was changed and there was a director, certain parts of the regulations were not changed along with it. So Joe Griffith's position, the DPL, Director of Department of Permitting and Land Use, the regulation should have changed to allow that individual also to appoint who is going to review the plans. It only makes sense that if because right now the way the regulation's currently written, it says the city planner or the designated individual. Authorized persons as designated by the city planner. So it only makes sense to add the Director of Permitting and Land Use to that chain, so that organizational chain, so they can also make those, decide who's going to review the plans. It doesn't mean that the city planner, and the city planner is probably still going to be continue to review the plans. I saw some of the comments from Mr. Sulkus, and I looked at his job description. It doesn't say he's the only person that's supposed to review the site plans. It says that one of his many jobs is site plan review. The bargaining unit work agreement I looked at as well. There was nothing in there about site plan review, so I don't know if I had the right document or whether that was the full document or not. So the main reasons for it are that the Director of Permitting and Land Use should be able to designate someone else to do a review. One of the things I brought up is that if the city planner, whether it's Mr. Sulkus or somebody else, isn't there, then no plan reviews are taking place and no plans are being certified complete in order to come in front of this board. I just want to see what the other reasons were for. 8-7D, the Director of Permitting Land Use should have the authority if the city planner has the authority. I think that I'll just give you a little bit of background. I know Milford's a different municipality than Guilford or West Haven or what have you. But when you submit something in these other municipalities, the application is submitted and that 65-day clock timeline starts ticking. If you change this regulation, it doesn't mean that the plans can't be reviewed. It just means that the clock is ticking at the time that the applications are submitted. And I understand the argument and potentially the frustration from members of the board who are volunteering their time to serve their community to do things like this, to have applications come in front of you that are not compliant or don't have everything, every I dotted and every T crossed. But if you look at the statute and you look at the case law, one of the notes actually by one of the courts, it's on the Jallowick Realty Associates, it's note 11, and it says the legislative history supports our conclusion that the legislature sought to create a time-efficient procedure for reviewing site plan applications, and proponents of that public act describe the 65-day time limit as avoiding a situation where a simple site plan, quote, disappears into the bowels of the commission for a year or two, end quote. So we're not saying that things take a couple of years here, but it's clear that the legislature wants these applications to be submitted or processed within the 65-day time frame. And the way it's set up right now, that's not occurring because, like I said, the clock doesn't start ticking. So I think that there is still a way to get the board finalized and complete and comprehensive plans in a timely manner. And I think the board, should really, I'm here to answer any of your questions, and I think the board should really consider to adopt most, if not all, of these proposed text changes. Oh, one other thing I would like to mention is in the staff review, the administrative summary, there's a lot of suggestions that things should be left to a department policy. The problem with that is that it's not a written regulation, and I think that's probably, if you have internal department policies about how they want to handle things, between staff and how Mr. Griffith or how Mr. Sulkus want to handle things, that's fine. But if you have a policy that impacts an applicant or a citizen or a member of the community making an application, it has to be written down and it has to be clear and it has to be part of the regulations. The reasons for that is, number one, it violates the uniformity requirement of the state statutes, meaning that different applications would be at risk of being treated differently. For example, if the policy is not written down and it's not a regulation, sometimes it's going to be applied and sometimes it's going to be missed or forgotten or just not applied. Or it's going to be applied to somebody because politically the project's unfavorable, and it's not going to be applied to somebody else because somebody likes that project. That's just how those things go. So to say that these, a lot of these things can be cleared up with policies is completely incorrect. The other comment about, this was just something that came up, there's a statute that requires, if you're an applicant that is a trust, that you're supposed to state who the beneficial members of the trust are in your application with a signed affidavit to prevent conflicts of interest on the board. I had suggested that the applicants in Milford also, if it's an LLC, also submit something so that members of the board know whether you have a conflict or not, because if you have an LLC and you don't know who the members of the LLC are, you could potentially, it could be a conflict that causes a problem either with the application, the applicant, or the board member. So thanks for listening. I think that there's room for, respectfully, I think there's room for some improvement. with an organizational decision. But I also think it's interesting that this goes back to, this 8-7D, it's referenced in the report, it goes back to 2008, 2009, and that it should be adhered to. And I think that part of it was missed when they implemented that regulation was not changed or updated when they implemented that. So pending your questions, that's my
Thank you.
argument.
Does
Thanks.
anyone have questions of the applicant? Mr. Sadi.
Thank you. Good evening, Attorney Crusaden. I did have a chance to go through the approximately 156 pages. I read most of the decisions. I don't have to agree or disagree, but there are some of the cases you cite that may be not binding us. But let's get to the bigger question. I know that it came up when I first saw these materials, and you indicated that there might be some discussion. I mean, how many applicants are we talking about? Is it every 50, every 25? Do you have a way of telling us, other than anecdotally, how many applicants you feel have been harmed by the delay? And it doesn't have to be just your clients, because I see that Attorney Lynch also put a letter in support of some changes here.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the question. I didn't really want to get into, specific number of applicants, but, a few years ago, I used to keep track. And I didn't bring that list with me tonight, but I used to keep track of how many times somebody got sent back and the plan was reviewed, and then the revisions were made, and then the plan was reviewed with different comments, and then the plan was reviewed with different comments, or that things sat for a significant period of time. I didn't think that would be productive for this conversation, but I will say, and I understand that I'm the only one here, I will tell you that there are reasons that other people do not want to come forward and complain about their application being delayed. People are afraid of retribution or then the application being delayed even further. So you're not going to get a big crowd of people. But I've talked to, it doesn't mean anything because, no one's going to get up here and sign an affidavit or testify under oath. I've talked to a lot of people that have a problem with the delay, and it ranges from national developers all the way down to local builders. Some of it, you have to kind of filter through it because some people are always in a hurry and everybody's late and everything's a delay. But over the years, there's been times where things have sat for a couple of months and there's been no reply to it. So you have to balance harassing for an answer because then there's a risk of a negative reaction versus trying to move the project along. But a lot of people called me in advance of this and said, hey, I'd like to support you, but I'm not going to get up there and put my name on it.
Thank you for the answer. I don't have to agree with you, but one of the things that I saw, and I took it a point when I was asking questions, even when I was a chair, one of the people that supported you was Attorney Lynch. And I know that on at least more than one occasion I asked him if he felt there was undue delays, because that's one of the concerns that you are raising on this application. So his letter is dated probably 4 months ago, 5 months ago. Mm-hmm. And here's somebody that really appears before the board almost as often as you do, maybe more than you.
Right.
I don't count that to me, but I see you here regularly with him.
Right.
And he was not indicating that the undue delay was there. And I think that for this major change, we really need facts as opposed to anecdotal to go where we have to go. So that being said, is there any more, and I understand your reason, but if the people don't want to come forward, do you want to add to the record and let us know that it's 50% of people have this issue, 10% of people? I don't agree with the issue of retribution, but there's a way that could be handled.
Well, I did notice, Mr. Sadi, you asking that question the past, several zoning meetings, and I kind of figured that that's what it was about. But that's not really the point, because I'm talking about, I've been doing this for, 17 years in Milford with just, a lot of land use applications. So asking one or two people over the past couple of months, number one, no one's going to be honest with you. And I invite you to, we can do a undercover applicant if you want, and you can come with me on one of these applications, and you can see how you're treated on this end of it in some cases, and how long it takes, and the frustrations and the delays with it. So no one's going to tell you, I don't have percentages. I like I said, I kept track for a while of things that I personally had, but I just have comments and complaints from other people over time, how long things have taken. But I don't think that that's the point. Number one, the regulation is non-compliant with 8-7G. If that was changed, a lot of these issues would go away because the site plan would be automatically approved. Number two, the Director of Permitting and Land Use should have the authority, if the city planner has the authority to designate a reviewing officer, the Director of Permitting and Land Use should definitely have the authority to designate the reviewing officer. So, I've heard anecdotally, I even heard from Mr. Sulkus that this application was going to get shot down in flames, was going to go down in flames. So I know there's probably been conversations about it, or there's been, statements made or comments made that, it's not going to fly for whatever reason. I really don't know why the board would resist compliance with the state statute. But once again, you're just not going to get people up. You have builders that this is their livelihood. They're not going to come up here and say so and so takes a long time and I don't like that. It's like hurting my business. They're just going to get along to go along and try not to make any waves for themselves. That's the reality of it. No, you don't have to agree with me, as you like to state, but that's what it is. I'm here as a citizen of Milford that's been doing this in Milford for 17 years. I've tried a variety of different approaches, and I've talked to a lot of different people. I've done a lot of different applications, and this is a way to try to fix this problem. The building department's been fixed. I mean, the building department has been a huge turnaround. And I think also, although he probably wouldn't say it, but I think that by changing this regulation, you would help the director of the Permitting and Land Use Department be able to do his job in a better manner or a more efficient manner.
Thank you very much, Attorney Crusade, and I have no
Thanks.
further questions this time, Mr. Chair.
Does anyone else have any questions of the applicant? Jim Cater.
Yeah, how you doing? I appreciate you bringing it up before the board and stuff. The only thing I would question is, now that we're aware of it, I kind of feel it's an internal issue that we should deal with. I'm not saying we shouldn't change exactly everything you said, but I kind of feel uncomfortable us voting on it, being presented to you, where I'd rather have internally, we look at every little detail, or, Joe and David look at things, and the subcommittee, maybe it needs to be looked at. I just feel uncomfortable voting on it.
I understand. I mean, I thought about that a little bit about today. I wanted to get the discussion in front of the board, make the board aware of the history of the Kimball report and the implementation team, a perspective from an applicant and also a Milford resident who goes through the process or on a regular basis, to give you, who you don't necessarily have the opportunity to hear it from this side or to deal with it on this side, whether maybe some of you do in other towns on a regular basis. But so I appreciate that, but I think the issue is that do you think that would really take place? I mean, I don't know that you can't do both. You can't either. There's no time limit on voting on this. There's a statutory time limit for a zone text change, but there's no what if you don't vote on it. So there's no automatic approval or anything like that. So you could take some time. You don't have to vote on it anytime in the near future. It could kind of just wait for your eventual decision. So, but I think, Mr. Cater, I think you could probably discuss it internally and then also decide what to do with this at the same time.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can this go to our regulations subcommittee? Okay.
Well, typically, when you have an application from an applicant, it comes directly to you. The Regulations Subcommittee looks at its own changes to the regulations. So Mr. Crusade would have a right to, have a decision if that's what you want to do. But again, typically, the subcommittee is just looking at your regulation changes and regulation changes proposed by staff.
Carl?
I'm just curious, prior to this submitted regulation change you're proposing, were there any complaints that went to staff prior to doing this, and what barriers did you face, and how long has it been, and why is it coming to us now?
Yeah, Mr. Moore, that's a great question. So prior to a director of permitting and land use, the complaint would go to the city planner, but after the director of permitting and land use was installed, sometimes complaints are made to the city planner and Mr. Griffith simultaneously. A lot of times of what happens, and I'll just be honest with you, I have something that's been sitting for a little while. I ask about it. I don't get a return email within a couple of days, and then I have the conversation with the client, and I say, look, I can go to Joe Griffith and ask Joe Griffith to prod David to give us an answer, and then you can potentially suffer some consequences from that, meaning that if 3 things were going to be found wrong with your application, now 15 things will be found wrong with your application. Or you can wait it out a little while and see if we get a review back. A lot of times people will, after a while, unfortunately, and I don't like doing it because it puts me in an awkward position, and we'll call Joe Griffith and say, hey, this hasn't been processed, can you look into it? Or we don't, this response from David's, we don't agree with. And then Joe will be responsive to it. And you don't always get, a resolution to it, but that's typically how it would work. Usually they're either phone calls or email complaints about some type of delay in the processing of it.
Attorney Crusade, I understand that, you have clients to represent. But I wonder if perhaps some of the delays were caused by your clients rather than caused by Mr. Sulkus. So the problem that I have with your regulation, the changes you want to make to the regulation is I'm not sure what the cause of the delays are. And I have heard nothing to say that the causes are anything but your clients.
Well, I disagree with that because the current regulation doesn't comply with 8-7D. And yes, said during the initial presentation, sometimes you get comments back. Let me just back up. Sometimes you file something and you don't get comments back for a significant period of time. So that doesn't have anything to do with the clients. Sometimes you get comments back and they go back to the client, and especially during COVID, things were a little bit delayed because engineers were delayed, surveyors were delayed because the land record departments were closed and they couldn't get things. So sometimes there would be some of that. But there is no, and that's not what this regulation change is about. So it's not a complaint that, hey, all of these applications are delayed. That's one of the effects of not following 8-7D. But so everything that I've presented to you, and like I said, it's based on my experiences over 17 years. It's not all based on the clients. There are occasional times when a client just disappears, and either the deal fell through and they're not going to purchase the property, so they don't go forward with it. But those aren't the types of things that we're discussing with respect to this. I'm talking about applications that are trying to get through the process and take extra time or more time than they should, either because of the time it takes to review them, whether that is because the department is understaffed and maybe they need an additional reviewing officer, or the number of comments or the number of times comments are made, additional comments are made. So yeah, the failure to comply with 8-7D does not have anything to do with what the clients do, because the clock is supposed to start ticking when you file the application. The problem is whether it's David, Mr. Sulkus, or somebody else, there's discretion or there's delay there that is in violation of the statute. So whether it's intentional, unintentional, there's malice behind it or there's no malice behind it, it just leaves the door open for delay, which causes problems.
Yep. Attorney Crusaden, following up on Jim's question a little bit, you mentioned that the building department had previous issues
Yes.
that have been fixed.
Yes.
Is this more of a process problem that the department has rather than a regulation issue? And how did the building department get those problems fixed?
I think there's a couple of things going on. I'm, like I said, trying to present it as an organizational level solution. The building department got fixed quickly because Joe Griffith was extremely knowledgeable about the building code and does not have a certification or is as knowledgeable about the zoning code, at least when he first took over the job. So the direct result of that was that either Joe Griffith could, I think he's got the license or the ability, as a chief building inspector, to review and approve plans. So I think that there was a personnel staffing part of that allowed the backlog to get cut up. And my understanding is, and I'm not in the room or familiar with that, and I really don't handle building stuff. I usually handle zoning, and then people go and get their own building permits. But my understanding was that Joe was able to see through inappropriate delays and positions that were taken by the previous building inspector because of his background and knowledge with the building code. And that made it either uncomfortable or untenable for that person, and then they retired. I don't know whether that's 100% true or partially true or what. Or maybe they just retired anyway. So it's not. So I understand the questions about the personnel staffing versus the organization. So I think that was a large part of it. So I think that had to do with Joe's background and ability to also certify plans, at least the building plans. And in this case, I'm not saying that the director would be a reviewing officer or that anything would change other than what's currently happening now, but at least there would be the ability to have somebody else review the plans and say, yes, these are complete. So I'm not sure if I answered the full part of your question.
Any other questions or comments? Jim?
Can I ask something? Can I push this to David? I see in a couple of the staff comments where the 8-7D was brought up, it was noted it wasn't needed and coded, like in one section here, 8-7-D is not needed, the reference to this. And you say the DPL policy and should not be coded through regulation. Do you feel what he's saying, kind of saying that we're not handling 8-7D correctly, and should we, or delays are you aware of, and if you are we doing anything about it, or internally?
Okay. Let me just find how, so you have in front of you, and just for the record, I'm not going to go through, unless you want me to, reading this report, the staff review. Keep in mind, this staff review was written by me, and the director has the approval of the department. So this is the city's stance on this particular issue. Had the city wanted to make changes back in 2007, 2008, they would have. They chose not to. The actual Kimball report only mentions in one line that on occasion there are delays in the planning and zoning office. That's it. It went on and had other issues with the building department, which was one of the impetuses for that whole report. But to answer your question, we follow basically the spirit of 8-7, and I've been told by attorneys of long experience who work all over the state that, gee, when they come to town, this is the way we do. It's a little unusual, but they like it because it's actually faster. Because what I always tell people who I meet with is, my job is to work with you to make you bulletproof. How do we make you bulletproof? We make sure that you have a zoning compliant application. You can call it a pre-application, you can call it whatever you want, but I work with them to make sure that by the time we get an application to you, you guys can approve it. And in doing all of that legwork ahead of time, you get a complete and approvable application. Under the statute, when people follow it to its letter, they can submit whatever they want. You then have to meet to make a determination. Is it compliant, is it not? And that clock will stop if you right there and say, no, and you've just ruled on it, not compliant. Off it goes. Now you're back to square one. And now you're going to wait through the cycle of coming to you, coming to you, coming to you. And that's more time for an applicant. And the important thing is that we deal with facts. We deal with the regulations. That's what we deal with. And when an applicant comes to me, sometimes they have a great application. They know the regulations. They know the facts they have to present. Fabulous. And what happens is they come to you faster than an applicant who has bad plans because they're not following the regulations. They don't have the facts. I do a review, and I provide that review to the applicant for whatever it is they submit. When the information is there, they get a comprehensive review. When the information isn't there, I point out problems, and I can review it to whatever degree the information says I can, and I give that to them. Now, if they come back with new information and better information, that can change the information they have already presented. So now, when I'm writing a review, there are new issues. Wouldn't have known about those issues before because I didn't have the information. So when Mr. Crusaden says, I'm picking on someone, I'm finding new problems, I'm just following the facts where they go. I don't discriminate against applicants. I don't pick on the applicants. I demand that the applicants follow our regulations and give us a zoning compliant application. That I do. And there are people who don't like that. There are people who were used to submitting applications in a particular way before I was here, basically on a napkin, and that got approved. Well, I keep to the regulations. And mind you, the regulations that we're discussing tonight were in place for decades before I even got here. So, all of a sudden, people don't like having to follow the regulations. Sorry, I'm giving you a good product because, it's important that the citizens of Milford are protected and that the applicants are protected and, can take full advantage of what the regulations allow them. I take exception with two comments Mr. Crisaden said. One, that I told him this is going to go down in flames. I never tell an applicant what an outcome is going to be. I don't know what the outcome of any application is going to be. I'm not a voting member. We present to you whatever the information is. You make the determination. If you want to approve this, that's your prerogative. If you don't approve it, that's your prerogative. And as I already touched on, I take exception to the comment that I take retribution on people. I don't take retribution on people. I am critical of bad applications that are missing information, and I hold people to the standards of the regulations, and if they think that's retribution, then so be it. If there's anything else I can answer, I'd be glad to.
That's a good answer. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak? Mr. Griffith, would you care to weigh in on this in any manner? Your position is being called out as taking specific responsibilities, and I'd be interested to know if you feel they are appropriate or inappropriate. But it is up to you, though.
I'm Joe Griffith, the Director of Permitting and Land Use. Which aspects would you like me to comment on?
The applicant has put forth a sort of a change in your responsibilities, giving latitude to choose different people to review site plans, and it also adds restrictions to when the clock starts ticking. This is all relative to your department and what you are in charge of. I wanted to just ask what your feelings are and your thoughts are on that.
A couple of points I think should be made. First, when we talk about the reviewing officer and whether I would be able to appoint other reviewing officers, we don't have any other reviewing officers. Short of me, and I work with Dave constantly, daily, and we're reviewing these subjects all the time. So it's not like he's working in a vacuum. But as far as being able to delegate to an assistant city planner, we don't have one. Delegating to the zoning enforcement officer, we do that in some capacities. When we take in a CAM review, first stop is to go to the zoning enforcement officer and get a comprehensive plan review that's specifically looking to take some of the load off the city planner and keep him focused on other aspects of the thing. As far as comments on the timeline that we're dealing with, I know that I think the statutes read, Kevin, jump in if I'm oversimplifying, but I think the statutes are reading that once an application is accepted, then there's a clock that starts. And I know with our inland wetlands agency, an application comes in the door. Mary Rose, in this case, is our inland wetlands officer. She is looking to make sure, not that the application is compliant, but that the application is complete. And then once it's deemed complete, it goes in front of the Inland Wetlands Commission, and they are accepting that application. That starts the clock. And I think that then gets into a rather robust dialogue between our office and the applicant, requiring the applicant, and again, requires our office to efficiently and quickly get back to the applicant to find out where the deficiencies are in the application, because now the applicant has to then turn around and respond just as fast and get back into us, because that clock is running. If it goes back in front of any board and the application is deemed not bulletproof, it gets voted down. It has to get voted down. And so I think that's something to consider as far as when that clock starts and when the application is received. And I think you were touching on that, weren't you? What was the other aspect that you were asking me about, Jim? I'm sorry.
It was primarily those two, whether or not and I think the point is that even if you don't have anyone else that could review one at this particular time, that either you or another person in your position may have that choice. And should that choice be with you, or should that be with the city planner, whoever that is now or maybe in the future? Is it appropriate that the city planner appoints, or is it better if the director of land use would have that capacity?
Well, I think when that regulation was written regarding the city planner being able to appoint a plan reviewer, that's when there was a assistant city planner on staff. So as I said, the good news, Dave, is you're going to continue doing the plan reviews, and the bad news is you can't delegate it to anybody else. I mean,
Is there an avenue for a third-party review? I've heard that there was, at the expense of an applicant, they could hire a competent third party to do that review. Is that still in force?
I don't think so. I mean, again, I know when we've had staff who have been on long-term leave, they've been sick, we have hired outside consultants to act in their capacity, but I don't know if we've ever done it in terms of a zoning application.
No, there's never been third-party reviewers for planning and zoning. There are third-party reviewers, as you know, for the building department,
Yes.
and that's a separate and special
Thank you.
thing.
Is there any further questions of the applicant?
Thank you, Mr. Quish. Chairman Quish, do you?
Excuse me, thank you, Mr.
Thank
Griffith.
This is to Mr. Sulkis. I was looking at the agenda, and I just noted that it said the hearing must close by today with a vote by the 9th of November, I believe. November 9th.
Yeah, that...
Are those the accurate dates?
No, those dates are not accurate because, among other things, as you're aware, any proposed regulation change is at your discretion. So there really is no closing date, and that is a typo and should not be there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Sulkis.
Any other questions or comments from the board? David, would you like to elaborate further before we open the public hearing?
All I can say is, again, what staff commented on in the report, and that, we're a town of 55,000 people, and there's one planner, and that's me. I do the best I can. I'm not perfect. Sometimes it takes time. Some applications go faster than others based solely on the materials that those applications provide in accordance with our regulations, and some applications take longer. And sometimes it's my fault that they take longer because I have to juggle a lot of things, and sometimes it's the applicant's fault it takes longer because they don't get me the information. All I can say is I do the best that I can with the resources that I have. Again, people have told me, both developers and attorneys, that although what we do is a little unusual, they like it because the end result is a better application with all the work done up front versus as the process goes through it, as they come to you and get rejected or come back and forth. They get the result that they're looking for in the end, as long as they're zoning compliant and as long as you approve it. So that's all I can say.
Thank you.
Can I just make one comment?
Before I open the public hearing, you're welcome to speak.
Or just a couple of follow-up comments. Mr. Griffith brought up a point that I also meant to bring up. Inland Wetlands has a similar statutory timeline, and they accept the applications at the next hearing and process these all the time. And those plans are also subject to review by the wetlands officer, and they've been doing it that way according to the statute for years. With respect to Mr. Sulkis's latest comments, That may be true. Maybe Milford needs to hire somebody else, or maybe there needs to be a third-party review, but it's still not compliant with 8-7D, and that causes problems. And then lastly, I will say this, and I don't want to get into it any further than that, Mr. Sulkus did absolutely tell me this application was going down in flames over the counter in the DPLU several months ago, number one. Number two, he told me that the special exception application on 4 Oxford Road that you approved in December was also going to go down in flames. So I am not going to be, it's not going to be made to look like I'm being dishonest, because I practice in front of this board all the time. I go above and beyond to be truthful to this board. I don't like having these conversations, but I am being 100% truthful. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a public hearing, so that if anyone would like to speak to this matter, please come up to the podium, state your name and address for the record. Keep your comments to about 3 minutes. Seeing none, is there any reason why any of the members think we should keep this public hearing open? Mr. Sadi.
Thank you. I have two options. I think actually there's three, but the first two I suggest that we consider is, number one, referring this to the regulation subcommittee. These are very substantial changes. It's not just one section of our zoning laws, substantial changes. Second thing we could do is ask for more information, and I think that Attorney Kersaden has done an excellent job, but I think we're still missing some parts, like how often this occurs. It's all anecdotal. So we can do one or two things, or the third thing is the board can determine that we should close the hearing and vote on it in a reasonable time. I suggest we consider something other than the last option. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I move to refer this to our subcommittee on regulations?
That's a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Mr. Sadi.
I'll second it.
Do we have any discussion on the motion?
When you send this to the regulations subcommittee, the discussion turns on whether or not, as a matter of fact, there is a problem. The regulations subcommittee is not a fact-finding body, as I understand it. So, how is that body going to verify the facts that are the underpinnings of these policy changes to change the regulation?
Mr. Quich, I might, with permission, respond to the question from Commissioner Hirsch. There's two parts of it, and that's when I would discuss this. We could go through the different provisions and say Section 1 is acceptable, Section 2 and 3, and we would give recommendations, which we have done in the past, and that's what my suggestion was. I don't think we're necessarily fact finders. We're just saying that this is correct or not, but I think that it just requires a more in-depth study. That's just my understanding of how the regulation subcommittee would act. I'm not suggesting how we should vote at this point, but that was my response to your question through you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other discussion on the motion? Seeing none, would you call the roll?
Ms. Austin. With the motion. Mr. Castagnoli.
Yes.
Mr. Hirsch.
With the motion.
Mr. Cater.
With the motion,
Mr. Collegian.
With the motion.
Mr. Moore.
With the motion.
Mr. Sadi.
With the motion,
Mr. Zaharidis.
With the motion.
And Chairman Quich.
I am also with the motion. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Chairman?
ju-
I'm sorry. The public hearing still remains open, though. Is that correct?
no, I think it was closed.
Well, this is really unusual, because you have a public hearing for something, again, an application, and you're referring it to the subcommittee, which may turn out basically a different regulation, and that would have to perhaps be, you can modify an application, but depending on what the modifications are, if it's a totally different application, it may end up being a totally different application. So,
So,
I mean,
are you saying that when we bring this, when the subcommittee brings this back to the board with any recommendation, that would be a continuation of this public hearing?
I guess it would have to be. If you don't close the public hearing, again, you are under no obligation to take any action on a regulation change.
So then
but
the
it's just-
applicant could then respond to the changes, if any, we decided to make as a subcommittee. I don't have a problem with it. Does anybody have a problem with the public hearing being open still? Thank you for the clarification. Thank you, Joe. I don't see any old business liaison reports.
None.
Subcommittee reports. We did have a meeting of both the Regulation Subcommittee and the Plan of Conservation and Development. The Regulation Subcommittee dealt with the issue of accessory dwelling units to see if there's any changes to our existing regulations that we feel are appropriate. The committee agreed to have a hearing or to welcome public comment at our next meeting, which will be next Wednesday. The Plan of Conservation and Development scheduled for that same Wednesday, later in the evening, a organizational meeting with the consultant to plan the rest of the POCD outflow. And also the minutes of both those meetings are online. We have a motion to approve the minutes of 8/16/2022.
I'll move to approve it.
Second. Motion and a second. Nancy, thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Seeing none, it's unanimous.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Going back, did you say that at the POCD meeting, the consultant would be there?
That was my request.
Today is the first day back. He was on vacation, so if we would like him at the next meeting, I can ask him.
Okay, so we're going to request that he be there.
Yes.
Exactly, yeah.
All right, thank you.
And I think that if he's not able to be there, we should change the date of the meeting because we want him there. That's the key element, right? Yeah. So we can reschedule if there's a conflict, but that is an essential part of the next meeting. Chair's report, no vote on whether to be in person, bad as I hate to say it. Staff report.
None this evening.
None this evening. Motion to adjourn. So moved. Thank you, everybody.